Week 6 of the US-Israeli war against Iran began with a furious social media post from President Donald Trump. On Easter Sunday, he threatened to wipe out Iran's power plants and bridges if it did not meet another 48-hour deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The next day, he stepped up his warnings.
Every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition.
Per the president's direction, today will be the largest volume of strikes since day one of this operation. Tomorrow, even more than today. And then Iran has a choice. Choose wisely, because this president does not play around.
On Tuesday, 12 hours before the deadline, he went on, posting, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will."
The whole world's been impacted, unfortunately, because Iran is violating every law known by striking commercial vessels in the Straits of Hormuz, and it's a big problem for the world.
Then, this morning Australian time, less than 90 minutes before the deadline, President Trump and Iran issued separate statements. President Trump said the US had received a workable 10-point plan from Iran, which Iran confirmed. President Trump said he would suspend bombing Iran for 2 weeks, but Iran said our hands are on the trigger. President Trump said the US had met and exceeded its military objectives, while Iran said it had achieved nearly all of its military objectives. President Trump said they were close to resolution. Iran said this does not mean the war has ended. Iran's 10-point proposal includes that it have military control of the Strait of Hormuz, that the US withdraw all of its forces from the region, and the end of sanctions against Iran.
In its current form, I think it is impossible. I can't see how this can work unless there is some sort of compromise worked out on both sides. The Iranian 10-point plan is not something that the Americans would agree to as it currently stands.
In the past few weeks, there have been conflicting reports of whether talks between the US and Iran have been taking place. But Pakistan has played a role in brokering this ceasefire. The talks will be held later this week in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad.
Pakistan has stepped forward. It seems to be trusted by Iran, which is a very important aspect of this. We do know that over the weekend, Iran let through 20 oil-laden ships to go to Pakistan. So there's that degree of confidence that the Iranians have got in the Pakistani role.
The Prime Minister has welcomed the ceasefire, but questioned President Trump's threats.
I don't think it's appropriate to use language such as that from the President of the United States. The conduct of any conflict must be within international law, and that provides for making sure that civilians who aren't parties to the conflict are given every protection possible.
In the meantime, Iran has agreed to allow ships to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz, supervised by its military.
The big sticking point is going to be that the Iranians appear to be insisting at this point that ships which go through first register with them, which really means with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that will be very difficult for the United States and for some Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in particular to accept.
The question now, will all this lead to peace?
These ceasefires, particularly in the Middle East, can be very fragile indeed. I don't think one would be very surprised if it were to break down very quickly. As I said earlier, there's zero trust between both sides.
The Foreign Minister Penny Wong joined me earlier. Minister, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, David.
So how optimistic or cautious are you that the significant points of difference between the US and Iran can potentially be resolved during this ceasefire period?
This ceasefire is fragile. There's no doubt about that, David. the ceasefire is fragile, but the world does need it to hold. There are obviously substantial points of differences between the parties, but I think we all know that the damage that is happening to the global economy, to global energy markets means that the world does need this ceasefire to hold.
I mean, the very fact that the Prime Minister is still going to visit his counterpart in Singapore later this week, you've been in contact with your regional counterparts, I understand. That suggests, doesn't it, that there is still caution that this won't necessarily be the end of the war?
And also a recognition that even if we do have the ceasefire holding, which is what we want, we have had very little oil come through the Strait of Hormuz over these last weeks, and that gap in supply to our region will have to be managed. And I spoke early on to Singapore, to Korea, to Malaysia. The Prime Minister, as you said, is going to Singapore. We've seen one announcement already, and we will continue to work with them. I spoke to the Japanese Foreign Minister just before this interview. We want to keep engaging with our counterparts because this is a very large shock to global energy markets, and one that will continue to have an effect.
Just on Australia's role in the region, 4 weeks ago, Australia deployed a wedge-tailed surveillance plane to help defend the United Arab Emirates. It was an initial 4-week deployment. Will that now be extended, or will the plane be brought home?
I'll leave that to Richard to make announcements about, but you would anticipate, we have a role which is in response to the request of the UAE. Regional partners have been experiencing attacks. You and I both know that.
And that doesn't.
Yeah, and but there's been no change to our particular posture that I've outlined earlier.
Iran says it's allowing controlled passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Does that mean it will operate the way it did before the war, or will ships have to pay?
I don't know that I can interpret what Iran is saying. But
so that's unclear.
What it is unclear. What we would say is that freedom of navigation is under international law includes freedom of navigation through the strait, and that should be observed.
What about the nuclear threat? The enriched uranium is still there in Iran. Has the nuclear threat been removed?
I think you've seen the US outline the military objectives that have been achieved, including, the degrading of Iran's navy, its air force, its military industrial capacity, its capacity to launch, which is why the Prime Minister and I have made clear it is time for de-escalation. We've seen the military objectives that have been outlined. Many of them have been achieved, and what we need to do now is to seek to de-escalate. So that's why the ceasefire is a good idea.
But the uranium is still there in Iran, is it not?
Well, I don't have access to the intelligence that the United States does. What I would say is that we spoke some time ago about the need, once certain military objectives had been achieved, to move to de-escalation, and that is what has happened. As I said to you in my very first answer, it's a fragile ceasefire, no doubt about that, but we all do need for it to hold.
But if there is still uncertainty around that enriched uranium, if there's still uncertainty around what's going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz, let me ask you, has this war been worthwhile?
You and I spoke about Australia's position in relation to this war and the parameters that we set on our position. We talked about the military objectives, which, as I've said, I think they've largely been achieved. Well, I think that is clear. But what I also said to you at the time, two things. One is, we're not supportive of this idea that regime change could be imposed externally, and secondly, we saw a great difference between the regime and the people of Iran. We see benefit now in the ceasefire holding. I think the whole world does see that.
But do you accept the regime's still there, the uranium is still there, the Strait of Hormuz remains under question, with Iran saying it wants to control passage through the strait? Can you understand people saying, well, what has been achieved here?
Yes, I can understand people being really concerned about what is happening on global markets and what has happened in the Middle East and the way this has escalated. which is why we have been saying for some time it's time for de-escalation.
Israel also says this ceasefire does not apply to its actions in Lebanon. Should it?
Yes.
So Israel should
Well,
stop its pursuit
Our
of Hezbollah in
position
Lebanon?
is that the world expects the ceasefire to apply to the region.
Before this ceasefire, Donald Trump did issue an extraordinary threat, as you'd be aware. A whole civilisation will die tonight, he said, never to be brought back again. The Prime Minister says that language was inappropriate. Was it worse than that, though? Was this the President of the United States threatening a war crime?
I don't think anyone should be threatening the destruction of a civilisation. I think that is Australia's and the Australian people's position. Does it matter more, though, and carry greater weight when it's the President of the United States, our most important ally? Anyone in positions of leadership, our words do carry weight. Australia's position, as the Prime Minister referenced, is that is not something we think anyone should be saying. Did that language shock you? I think I've outlined our position on that. But I am interested, as Foreign Minister, do you simply see this as Donald Trump's unpredictable, unique negotiating style, or does it, to you, raise serious questions about the role of the US and its role, as a stabilising force in the world? There's a lot of things that come from that. I think I have made clear our view about that statement. It doesn't have a bigger implication for you? I think I've made clear our view about that statement. But what you're really talking about is a very different approach by the United States under this administration, and we've spoken about that previously, David.
What is your view about that
my view about that is that we have a much more unpredictable United States. We've said that, and so what do you do about that? We do a number of things. One of them is we focus on our region, we focus on developing relationships with other powers. We continue to work closely with the United States. Our institutions work very closely together. We recognise that the US will take a different view on certain issues to that which Australia will. We recognise that. But the last 5 weeks in particular, has this shifted your view further on the United States under Donald Trump? The sort of language that he's used, the way he's conducted this, has this shifted your view even further? Well, I think I have been clear with the Australian people from the time President Trump was elected that he envisaged a very different role for America in the world, and we are seeing that. But what we have to do is continue to work with the US through the institutions, particularly, that work together well. And we need to continue to develop and strengthen the relationships with the countries of our region, and that's what the government's doing. And can I ask you about the reports of Australian Special Forces being used or being present in the region? What can you tell us about that deployment? Well, two things. One is we don't comment on or give details that go to operational security, but what I would say is that what I told you, I think, a month ago, and what the Prime Minister has repeatedly said and the Defence Minister remains the case. We are not taking offensive action against Iran, and that our role in the region is defensive. Do we still have diplomats across the region, or have most of them been pulled out? We've had some diplomat families, dependents return. We're public about that when that occurs. We still have a presence in the region. We've also seen about, I think, 12,000 Australians return home from the Middle East, which is a good thing. And I hope we can see this ceasefire hold and the region move to a more predictable footing. Foreign Minister Penny Wong, thanks for your time. Good to speak with you. Well, as the government responds cautiously to this ceasefire, it's also facing the difficult task of preparing next month's budget in a climate of uncertainty. Here's 7:30's political editor Jacob Greber on the economic fallout from the war.
You can see here the ASX 200 up almost 3%. This is the best day this year.
The long-awaited Middle East ceasefire has brought immediate relief to financial markets. They've responded with extreme optimism, almost as if the crisis has been totally solved.
Signs that ships will begin moving again have partially soothed fears Australia's fuel stocks could collapse.
The big danger is running out. The good news is that the latest news says that's looking a little less likely.
Even if the government's quiet caution is a reflection of this unpredictable war.
Obviously, we hope a ceasefire takes hold and becomes, the permanent arrangement, obviously. If you're asking me to, say with a great deal of certainty to predict events in the Middle East in coming days and weeks, I'm not going to do that because it's a fast-moving situation.
There's no question Donald Trump's back down from threats to obliterate Iran has delivered an overdue dose of good news. But regardless of whether the ceasefire leads to a lasting peace or how quickly energy production out of the Gulf is revived, the economic consequences are already serious.
Normal is still a long way away. There's been a lot of damage to oil and gas infrastructure, and that will remain an ongoing challenge for a number of months yet.
Economists warn the ongoing uncertainty will continue to weigh on businesses and consumers, with a leading survey showing it's near the lowest on record.
You look at measures of consumer confidence, how families are feeling. We are desperate for some sort of resolution.
The twists and turns of this war are turning next month's budget into a mammoth test of how to manage unpredictable economic fallout while maintaining political fortitude. There's a question now about how far the government will go with its ambition for significant reform, such as on tax changes to property or spending cuts in sensitive areas like the NDIS, particularly when key parts of the electorate are in need of economic triage and looking to alternatives like One Nation.
It's really difficult to land triple pike and dive, catching a falling knife, because a bunch of things could still happen.
It's completely unique in terms of anything this Treasurer and this government's confronted, and probably we haven't seen a situation like this since the global financial crisis.
There will obviously be a context of this budget, which is what is going on in the world.
The government has indicated that this year's budget will be finalised unusually late ahead of its May 12 delivery, a sign it's being forced to make trade-offs.
Reform creates losers as well as winners. The losers are really grumpy. Reform that also repairs the longer-term budget balance means more losers.
Hanging over the government's budget task is the need to avoid making inflation worse. The pace of consumer price increases was already accelerating ahead of the war, and the global energy shock is likely to make that worse, putting pressure on the Reserve Bank to keep raising interest rates. Many economists argue that offsetting that pain with more government relief would be counterproductive in the fight against inflation.
So what the government should do is generate more losers, right, for the longer term good. But the politics of that are challenging.
There is a better than 50% chance of a major economic downturn before the next federal election.
Economist Warren Hogan, a critic of the Labor government's economic management, argues the Reserve Bank needs to hike interest rates 3 more times.
The only clear path, in my view, for fiscal policy is to tighten up and to take some pressure off inflation.
While there is a tendency to bleakness in some of the prevailing economic commentary, understandable given the global turmoil, Australia does have advantages. For one thing, it exports more energy to the world than it imports for its own consumption. Research last month by Citibank shows that Australia is among only a handful of countries that enjoy a net benefit to gross domestic product from energy exports, an energy advantage the Prime Minister is using as leverage to guarantee supply.
We are a reliable supplier of energy, particularly for North Asia, for Japan, for South Korea, but also supplying LNG to Singapore, to Malaysia, and we expect reciprocal arrangements.
As in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago, that natural energy advantage means that while prices are up at the petrol pump, national income should surge from LNG and coal sales.
As was true with the Ukraine war, you're going to see a budget that's better as a result of those temporary windfalls. But that's also challenging. I mean, the politics of when families are worse off, but the government is better off.
Which sounds like a potent recipe for community grievance, something the government's political opponents are eager to exploit.
So I'm not proposing a replay or reset, I am proposing a revolution. Some of it will need the slaying of long overdue sacred cows.
The economy is in trouble prior to this crisis. The issue is whether or not this crisis point tips us over the edge, and no one knows the answer to that.
When President Trump launched Operation Epic Fury in February, he justified the attack by saying Iran was attempting to rebuild its nuclear program. Well, so far, Iran's 10-point plan says it commits to not seeking possession of any nuclear weapons. But what will happen to its stocks of highly enriched uranium remains unclear. Ernest Moniz was the US Energy Secretary under President Obama when the last nuclear deal was struck with Iran. He now co-chairs the Nuclear Threat Initiative. I spoke to him earlier. Ernest Moniz, welcome to the program. Under this 2-week ceasefire, the US will stop bombing Iran and Iran will reopen the Strait of Hormuz, allow the safe passage of ships for 2 weeks. Does this suggest to you that both sides are looking for a permanent off-ramp to end this war?
Well, I think both sides would like to end the war, but I think the conditions for ending the war are not entirely in sync, and we'll see what happens in these 2 weeks. In principle, I think Iran has basically survival as its principal objective at this stage. And I think that they are not looking, of course, to win this encounter militarily. They're unlikely to win any direct confrontation. But I think they are aiming to deter any third attack. And so the question is, will they judge that they have created enough economic pain for deterrence? And if they will receive sufficient assurances against a third attack, not only by the United States, but also by Israel. The United States, on the other hand, of course, wants to maintain open, free passage through the straits and make sure that the 60% uranium issue is resolved. So I think all of this remains to be negotiated.
I want to ask you about your expertise on Iran's nuclear, its uranium stocks. President Trump's statement didn't directly mention Iran's uranium, nor did the statement from Iran's Supreme National Security Council. You have been raising particular concern about what's left of that uranium. What are your concerns and what priority should this be given during the 2 weeks of negotiation now?
Well, I think a major priority has to be to resolve the issue of where is the 60% enriched uranium, what is its condition, and how can the threat be removed. Those, I think, are only addressable in the end diplomatically through the international inspectors. And so the question is, will that be part of the settlement? I think my position had been, going back to last year, that, in my view, Iran should not be given anything in return for the 60% uranium because they had crossed a red line in producing the material.
Just give us a sense of the threat posed by this material. 60% enriched uranium, we keep being told, is not quite weapons grade, but you believe it does still pose a very serious threat.
Right. Weapons grade, just to be technical about it, is 90% enriched. And that is obviously preferable for an efficient, small weapon. But 60% will make a nuclear explosive directly, some penalty, but not an enormous one compared to 90%. So that's what I say is that, look, they had crossed the line. They have never provided any viable reason for a civilian use of that uranium. No one else in the world has ever produced that for civilian purposes. And in fact, again, the Hiroshima weapon in 1945 did not have weapons-grade uranium, and it caused a very bad day in Hiroshima.
And do you believe this stock of uranium is in one place, as we keep being told? Donald Trump has suggested it's deep underground, they can keep an eye on it. Are you as convinced of that?
I'm absolutely not as convinced of that. Prior to the June bombing last year, the international inspectors said the material was in 3 different places. That's what they saw. Iran went through an operation that could look as though they were consolidating the material in one place, but I have no way of knowing that. I don't believe anyone could verify that other than through human intelligence means, not through satellites.
Finally, I want to ask you about the global energy shock that we've been witnessing. Now, under this 2-week ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz may well reopen with safe passage of ships. But how will what's happened over the last month or so change the global energy market, particularly for countries like Australia that are energy exporters?
Well, first of all, I do want to emphasize that I at least do not fully understand what the freedom of passage is going to mean. Now, let's assume that there is free passage. Well, the oil prices will eventually come down, but I think there will be a risk factor for quite a while, and it'll take time in any case to resolve things, probably months. Natural gas is even more difficult. First of all, there were no alternative pipeline ways of exporting natural gas as there are with oil. I think Saudi Arabia and the Emirates will build more pipeline capacity to avoid the strait, frankly. They can't do that with gas. Qatar, furthermore, has said that its physical facilities have been damaged, and it may take years to fully restore those. And then secondly, even forgetting the years time frame, there are many shoes yet to fall. For example, we all know that the Gulf is very critical in the fertilizer supply chain. For example, they provide almost half of the world's sulfur, which is an ingredient for phosphate fertilizers. The impact on crop yields from fertilizer shortages won't be felt for many, many months. So there are going to be a whole, there are going to be waves and waves of this tsunami affecting the global economy, affecting inflation. And the real fear is that we will, on the one hand, see inflation in many countries, economic inflation, while at the same time we see a global recession, which is not atypical of major oil shocks. So I think that there's a lot of uncertainty still today, and we're going to be playing this out for weeks, months, possibly even years in terms of the LNG supply.
Ernest Moniz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.